Imagine you're going out with a group of your friends tonight, and say you all love burger joints. The atmosphere, the food, the drinks, whatever it may be, there's just something you all love about a good old burger place. And lo and behold, the brand new one just opened up across the street from your favorite spot. Wow. Lucky you. So naturally, you and the boys decide to go and check it out. And I promise I do have a point with all of this, just hang in there for me. But this time, one of your friends decides to bring along his little brother with him. Not a big deal, he's not necessarily a part of your group, but you don't see any reason why he shouldn't just join right in. You get there, you sit down, and by the end of it, you have an overall great time. The vibes were there, the service was quick, and the food was pretty good. So as you're sitting there and you're waiting for the bill, you wrap things up with your verdict. Yeah, this spot wasn't bad, but the food wasn't quite as good as our favorite spot across the road, and it was quite a bit more expensive here, so I really don't see us coming back here more than every few months. Then, all of a sudden, that little brother pipes up. Well, the service was better here. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't a bad experience, just I find the other spot to provide more overall value, and the menu here is far simpler. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really consider that as I'm so used to the other places' options and only see them as a positive thing. I understand that some people solely want a good old-fashioned classic cheeseburger, but I also imagine that the majority of those people, if they took the time and commitment to try something a little out of their burger comfort zone, would come to appreciate the... And I thought the food here was actually great. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad. I just think our favorite spot across the road is noticeably better, and again, it's also cheap. Well, you actually have to remember that this place just opened. You really can't compare your old spot to this new one. It's not fair. Your place wasn't nearly as good when it first opened as it is now. You have to give this new place time to get to the same spot as the old one. What? They're both burger places. They're both open at the same time. They're both providing the same service. In fact, they're directly competing against one another to provide that service. Therefore, I'm gonna judge this place directly against the other place. Also, I don't agree that my favorite spot was significantly worse than it is now. And this place has far fewer staff members. In fact, it has probably 3 times less employees. I'm still gonna judge the products available to me as a customer on an even playing field. And as I already said, I believe the product provided to me by the other location is just better. Well, you're just biased towards your favorite burger spot. That analogy represents the crux of the Last Epoch versus Path of Exile debate that's been going on recently. With my previous video, which was a review of Last Epoch after the 1.0 update, I threw my hat into the ring and, well, I've got some things to clarify here. Now, if you did not watch my review, don't worry, you don't need to. Here's all you need to know. In my review, I stated my opinions on Last Epoch relative to what I believe to be the foundational pillars of any action RPG: combat, itemization, and endgame. For combat, I felt that it was in a good spot, massively improved over the pre-1.0 state of the game, but it doesn't really do anything different to other ARPGs that came before it. By the way, yeah, this dude right here, that was literally my point. Instead of just copying every other ARPG's moment to moment that came before. Every other ARPG's moment to moment that came before. Last time I checked, Path of Exile is an ARPG that came before Last Epoch. But hey, sick burn, bro. Hey, you got me, man. Good job. Fantastic. For itemization, same idea. Pretty good, but a little too basic. And for endgame, pretty poor, especially when compared to... Now, here is how I dropped the ball in my review. First, I solely stated my opinions based on those foundational pillars. I did not deviate from them by talking about everything else that an ARPG, and really any game, has to offer, such as quality of life, world building, sound design, music, art direction, etc. I just stuck to combat, itemization, and endgame. And on top of that, I directly compared Last Epoch to Path of Exile in each of those pillars, ultimately concluding that PoE just does it better. But I did not give enough context as to why I thought that. To put it simply, the review was only 5 minutes when it should have been 10. Both of those failures are on my end and are clearly grounds for an iffy review, so I don't take any issue with people that said the review was half-baked. You are correct. But the biggest complaints were not that my review wasn't fleshed out. No. To understand the majority of the discourse created on my review, we're gonna have to go back to some burger action here in this video. And before I dive in, I want to make it clear that I still do stand by my rating of a 7 out of 10 for Last Epoch. Again, that is a 7 out of 10. That's above average. But now, let's get back to some burgers. We'll start here with the final line of that fictional story of, "You're just biased." This was the #1 point made in defense of Last Epoch in my comments. The claim is that because I showed clear bias towards Path of Exile, the points made against Last Epoch were moot, and also by extension, the review as a whole. I truly believe that in this scenario, you all mistook a clear preference for a clear bias. Those are two very different things, as I'm sure most of you know. Their end result is the same, choosing this specific thing over that specific thing, but the difference being bias implies there is no reason for said choice. And I actually don't fault you all for reaching that conclusion of he must be biased, because as I already said, I failed to provide enough context as to why I believe PoE to be the superior product. So don't worry, in this video, I will elaborate. But before that, more burger time. The next line I want to talk about was, remember, this place just opened. You can't compare the two. Oh boy, this one's a bit of a doozy. Prepare yourselves. Quite simply, yes, I can compare them that way. Last Epoch is an action RPG that is available to play in the year 2024. Path of Exile is also an action RPG that is available to play in the year 2024. Therefore, I am going to directly compare the games in their current state and all other ARPGs available for that matter in 2024 in their current states. It really is that simple. Like, imagine you love movies, specifically IMAX movies. As in, the first time you saw an IMAX movie, it fundamentally reshaped the way that you see movies forever. Say you then go to a new theater and it doesn't have an IMAX. What are you gonna do when someone says, but dude, you have to give this theater time. They just opened. You can't compare it to other theaters that already have IMAX. Is that a valid point whatsoever? No. Now, your response definitely could be, sure, I may revisit this theater if and when it gets IMAX, but it doesn't change the fact that they straight up don't have IMAX right now. To relate it back to games, dismissing any criticism by saying Last Epoch just hit 1.0, you can't compare its lack of content to what PoE has now, it's just invalid. It does not work. Period. And even if you say you have to compare Last Epoch to PoE 5 years after PoE's initial release, because 5 years is the amount of time it took Last Epoch to go from early access to 1.0. So if you say that, then I hate to break it to you, but it doesn't get any better for you. I don't care what PoE had, I care what it has now. It's the inverse with Last Epoch. I don't care what it may have, I care what it has now. Like, what does saying, oh man, this game has so much potential even mean? Like, what game doesn't have potential? Even Diablo 4, a game that I would give at most a 4 out of 10. Has potential. Like, Blizzard could theoretically decide to sell the Diablo IP on over to another studio, and then that studio could theoretically have the exact set of employees to take Diablo in the right direction finally. Or, you know, Blizzard could just magically fix Diablo. All of that could happen, but we're not dealing with the what ifs, we're dealing with the whats, the nows. I am comparing Last Epoch directly as a product in its current state to every other similar product in their current state. Period. That being said, let's say that we did go back and compare old Path of Exile to current Last Epoch. If we call the beginning of open beta the initial release of Path of Exile, this puts us at June 7th, 2013. On June 7th, 2013, we saw the release of the first ever challenge leagues, Anarchy and Onslaught. If you did not know, Path of Exile in its infancy of seasonal content actually released 2 separate leagues simultaneously, one for softcore, one for hardcore. Anarchy was a softcore league whose mechanic was adding rogue exiles that spawned in with custom-made builds and always dropped an entire set of gear on death. Onslaught, on the other hand, was the hardcore league whose mechanic was giving Onslaught to the monsters. 20% attack, cast, and movement speed. Yep, that was the entire league mechanic. Can't say you win them all, boys. Okay, cool. So now you know where PoE started. That was in 2013. Okay, so now let's see where PoE ended 5 years after development, which again, Last Epoch from early access to 1.0, 5 years. So Path of Exile, 5 years post Anarchy Onslaught. Well, that would put us at the league running during June 7th, 2018, which was Incursion League. Incursion was a tiny bit different than Anarchy and Onslaught. Incursion's league mechanic was centered around the Temple of Atzawaddle. This was a hidden area lost to time with the league's NPC, Alva, trying to find it. As you encountered Alva, you would slowly make progress towards discovering the temple's modern-day location. Basically, you went into a map, you found Alva, she teleported you back in time, you slayed monsters with the choice of killing one of 2 architects, and then afterwards you got some loot. Then, your temple progressed based on your choice of architect. Whichever one you spared was the one whose chamber was upgraded. For example, if I was given the Torment Cells and Warehouse architects, and I chose to kill the Torment Cell guy, my temple would then upgrade the Warehouse chamber by 1 tier. There were a maximum of 3 tiers per chamber, with the 3rd and final tier providing substantially more reward than the first 2. Finally, after you completed 11 total incursions, so you did that entire thing I just described 11 times, Alva would locate the temple, and then you would go there to reap the rewards in the modern era, with the chance to face the temple's boss, provided that you actually remember to connect the rooms together. You see all the goods. Did you forget again? Oh man, sucks to suck, man. Anyway, my point here is that Incursion League was a long way away from 20% increased attack, cast, and movement speed. Also, what I just described to you was solely the league mechanic. The entire patch 3.3.0 had much more content added with it. Content like 11 new skill gems and 1 new support gem, 31 new unique items, 22 new divination cards, and balance changes to roughly 70 skills. and massive passive tree changes. And all of that was contained within one single league 5 years after the game's initial launch. Not to mention that the expansion for Path of Exile at the time was War for the Atlas, which entirely revamped the Atlas and, by extension, the in-game mapping mechanic as a whole. This was actually the first time that we were able to influence our maps, as well as the origin of using sextants to guarantee specific content. Mechanics that both of which are still widely used in maps to this day. Now, hold on, hey, that one single dude, I know what you're typing, bro. Hold on, please give me a second. But Wookie, the original Elder group, was a pain to micromanage, and section overlapping was so cumbersome I still have PTSD from seeing all the red circles together. The mechanics you just described are nowhere near as fleshed out as their modern day equivalents. Yeah, cool, bro. You just did the classic internet thing of taking one very specific point from my entire statement and then completely taking it out of context and then using it to straw man my argument. Congratulations, dude. Oh, and guess what released 3 months after Incursion? Delve, a league mechanic that to this day people still choose to run entirely as their endgame of choice. That's right, they straight up ignore everything that mapping has to offer just to delve it up. That league mechanic was the very next one for 5-year-old Path of Exile. So now you have the entire context to what Path of Exile was like in its infancy and 5 years past that point.
But Woolie, last Epoch actually released in April of 2019
and 1.0 was in February, so actually you're giving 2 free months to patch. Just stop. Please just stop. Are you honestly gonna sit there and tell me that last Epoch right now is better than Path of Exile was during Incursion League? Not to mention Path of Exile right now, you know, in the current year, 2024, which again is exactly how we should be comparing the two games. And just in case you still think that last Epoch's content holds any water to Path of Exile's.
Yes, even when magically rewinding back to 2018 Path of Exile.
Do you know how much time 6 years is? Like, even if we do compare 2018 Path of Exile to 2024 last Epoch, we still have to account for the gap between those two eras, right? Of which that gap is 6 years. 6 freaking years. For reference, before Path of Exile, seasons in an action RPG literally just meant wipe everyone's character, wipe their stash, and go again on the ladder. Let's go, baby. Everyone's starting fresh again with nothing else new whatsoever. Let's go. Path of Exile innovated seasonal content in action RPGs, and after 5 years, iterated upon that idea so much to the point that they reached Incursion. That was in 5 years. So what happens after 6 years? So if we compare some other games that are still within the same genre to one another 6 years apart, that would be like comparing Halo 1 to Halo 3. So let me say that again. Best case scenario, if you see anyone trying to make the argument of, you can't compare modern last Epoch to 2018 Path of Exile, of which that's already an asinine argument to begin with, that argument is the equivalent of comparing Halo 1 to Halo 3. Halo 1, Halo freaking 3. It's like comparing Call of Duty 1 to Modern Warfare 2. Like, are you actually kidding me? Are you last Epoch fanboys that retarded?
Woolie, you can't say that word. That's illegal.
Stop it. No, I mean it. If you think that dismissing any amount of criticism is valid by claiming, oh, it's only been 5 years, you gotta let them cook, bro. You are, number one, a fanboy, and number two, actually retarded. If 11th Hour Games released a last Epoch Funko Pop, you would be the first in line and you have room temp IQ. So please save the brain power from typing up a comment on my channel and use it for something else like, oh, I don't know, breathing. Thank you. The best part is I didn't even mention what last Epoch added with its 1.0 update 5 years after its initial release. Let's see here. Oh, the unequivocal best part of the patch, the factions system. Wow, you mean prophecies? Those things from the league before Incursion? Cool. Wow. Awesome. Let's go. Jokes aside, I do actually enjoy the faction system. I've only played using the SCF one, but I'm not complaining about extra loot, you know? Now, it's not to say I think the faction system is some absolutely groundbreaking, innovative system that redefines loot and player interactions in action RPGs. I just think that factions set out to accomplish a very specific goal and they do it well. And yes, obviously there is more to the 1.0 update than the faction system, such as the league the cycle mechanic. You occasionally find caches of loot and open them, and then sometimes they're guarded by a mage, and that mage drops items with different efficacies than normal. All right, I mean, it's definitely better than 20% speed, but it's basically like Anarchy with the Rogue Exiles dropping slightly different gear than usual. Anarchy from 2013 Path of Exile, the first league ever. You know, at this point, I was going to continue breaking down the whole burger analogy thing, but I think it's better I just talk specifics on last Epoch now. I mean, the only other thing about the burgers I was going to talk about was how the menu was less complex at the new place versus that old favorite place across the street. It was more robust, which I actually think that's a very valid point in favor of last Epoch. In fact, I've made videos on this exact topic in Path of Exile, not once, but twice. You know, just in case you needed any further proof that while I definitely prefer Path of Exile, I am not just fanboying over it. PoE's biggest downfall is, and always has been, its inability to concisely explain things to players. I don't actually agree with the sentiment that PoE is just a bloated mess of a game. I believe that it only feels bloated because it's absolutely terrible at explaining new things to new players. Those players just assume that, oh, tons of content that I have no idea what it does must be bloat. Anyway, go check out my video on depth versus complexity if you would like my more nuanced take on the matter. Regardless, my overall point with bringing all of that up is that I have been, and I will continue to be, hypercritical of Path of Exile and really any game for that matter, because it's just what I do. I love games. I want to see games get better. They're only going to get better if people offer valid criticism towards them. It's that simple. Anyway, back to Last Epoch and simplicity. Yes, if you enjoy Last Epoch because it is simpler than Path of Exile, that's totally valid. Why? Because if you have reached that conclusion, you then must have also reached the conclusion that despite what Path of Exile may or may not offer, it is simply not worth your time to figure it out. Your time is literally the most valuable thing you can attribute to your hobbies. I get that. But on the flip side, is it not then equally as valid to say, well, I understand that you enjoy Last Epoch's simplicity. However, I believe that if you were to give PoE the necessary time and effort, you would also enjoy its overall experience the same, if not more, than what Last Epoch has to offer. Both of those are valid. You guys like Last Epoch because PoE wasn't worth your time. I like PoE because Last Epoch was not worth mine. Those are obviously super watered down conclusions there. Need I remind you yet again that I gave Last Epoch a 7 out of 10 and recommended it at full price? So please don't start thinking, oh, he said Last Epoch wasn't worth his time. He hates the game. All right, time to start wrapping things up here. And to do so, I'll just spitball my thoughts on Last Epoch as a whole. Now, remember how I said that in my review, I focused on the three foundational I just held up 2 fingers. The 3 foundational pillars in an action RPG. Well, how about everything else that Last Epoch has to offer? Sound and music. I think it's all right. To be honest, I'm a real stickler when it comes to music and games. It really takes a special soundtrack for me not to turn the in-game music off within the first few hours. Frankly, Last Epoch just is not one of those games for me, so 5 out of 10. In terms of sound design, it's fine. When I blow up hordes of enemies, I'm definitely not disappointed by the sounds coming out of my speakers, but I'm definitely not wowed either. 6 out of 10 for sound design. Art direction and world design, both are solid. Running through the various landscapes, it's a pleasant sight to the eyes. There are genuinely some cool backdrops in Last Epoch. 7 out of 10 for both. That being said, the narrative elements, attempting to tie those artistic elements together, yeah, not very good. The best way I can describe the story in Last Epoch is as if a toddler dumped all of his toys on the ground and then he chose his favorite ones and they started like making them up and doing a story with them. It's like some of it's pretty creative, sure, but it doesn't really all fit together nicely. Like first some bird dudes drop out of the sky and then try to murder you, and then suddenly you're looking for the god of the ocean, and then you find a big deer and a big bird guy fighting, and oh, did I mention that you traveled back in time multiple points in the story already? It's all kind of a mess and largely uninspired. I'll give it a 4 out of 10 for the narrative. Quality of life, it has more than Path of Exile. Period. Basically infinite stash space, auto pickup on the most tedious loot in the game, and an in-game loot filter that is intuitive to use. There are probably more things that I'm forgetting, but those are definitely the big ones. 9 out of 10 for quality of life, and it would be a 10 out of 10 if the stupid respec vendor was not like 100 yards away from the TP for whatever reason. Finally, overall content and depth. I already kind of touched on this one, but just to reiterate, it's a pretty shallow game. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. If this is the scale of all ARPGs from simple to complex, I would argue that Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 are like over here, right? Diablo games are like the simplest thing you can do. On this side, what do you think it is? Of course, Path of Exile. So simple, complex, Diablo, Path of Exile. Last Epoch, somewhere in the middle. I would argue that it's probably a little bit closer to the Diablo franchise, honestly, but it's somewhere in the middle. Basically, I found the game way too easy. Now, I have played pretty much every other action RPG that's released in the past 10 years. Grim Dawn, Victor Vran, Van Helsing, Torchlight, etc. And I really can't say that Last Epoch was harder than any of those other games. I mean, even if I disregard the respec system entirely, of which I only use like 3 or 4 times for a total of 10 points or something, I don't think that Last Epoch really offers any meaningful challenge. Like, what's the point in grinding all of the gear and leveling up your character if there's nothing in place to showcase that power? Regular monoliths and empowered monoliths contain literally identical content, just empowered ones have higher monster HP and damage. So is that challenge to you all? And by the way, whoever commented on my previous review video saying, oh, this guy didn't even get to empowered monoliths,
Bro, that's like the equivalent of getting to yellow maps and then calling it a day.
No, it's literally not. As I said in that review, which you seem to miss entirely, it's not the maps themselves that matter, it's what's inside of those maps. Plus, and this one's on me, don't worry, I actually have played empowered monoliths. I kind of forgot to mention in that review that I had 70 hours in Last Epoch before the 1.0 update, of which I progressed through some of the empowered monoliths. Regardless, my point still stands. Last Epoch fails to offer any meaningful challenge, and thus the progression that you make on your character feels largely irrelevant. I feel like that this is a fundamental flaw in the game's design, and the fact that I followed Last Epoch throughout its entire early access lifespan and that fundamental flaw has not changed, I doubt it ever will. Last Epoch is intentionally designed to be simple. It is intentionally designed to be a massively streamlined loot pinata and nothing more. It offers the illusion of choice in character builds, which I hate to break it to you guys, but if you spec into any witch nodes you please on any given skill, it will perform nearly identical to anyone else's skill, which all of that to say, that is why I stated at the very beginning of my initial review that Last Epoch has taken the place of what Diablo 3 used to fill. Overall, lack of depth is what I meant by that statement, which again, and my final point here, that's totally fine. If you have been looking for another no strings attached action RPG loot grind fest, if you just want something where you can turn off your brain, click buttons and be happy, then you have found it in Last Epoch. Woohoo, there you go. But if you've been looking for something more, well, it's not going to fulfill that craving. And remember, 7 out of 10. Like, come on, is that even that bad, guys? It's a 7 out of 10. That's a pretty good rate. Like, if you were to come up to me and say, hey, man, with no context whatsoever, hey, man, I think Path of Exile is a 7 out of 10 kind of game. I'd be like, you know what? I can see that. That's not, you know what? That's not unfair. I can see that, man. Cut me some slack, guys, would you? Anyway, thank you for watching, especially if you stuck around here to the end of the video, and especially if you were the ones that disagreed with me in my initial review, and you stuck around to the end of the video here. Sincerely, I genuinely appreciate you sticking around to the end. In fact, if you are one of those people, go ahead and type a smile face before you type your comment out in this video. Like, whatever you're gonna say, before you say it, just type a smile face before it. That way I know that you are one of the ones that stuck through to the end. Anyway, thank you for watching. And hold up, don't you try and edit that smile face out, you little stinky boy. I'm on